You had a good chance to see the Olate dogs, and we're thrilled about that. Now we're thrilled to present to you the Democratic candidate for governor from Massachusetts, Dr. Don Berwick. And we have with him Mr. Doug Foy, who is an amazing person himself. He's been very involved in our government. He was a super secretary under Governor Mitt Romney. He is an environmentalist. He's been involved with the Conservation Law Foundation, and he's very qualified to have a wonderful conversation with Dr. Don Berwick. So I'm going to pass it over without further ado. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Karen. Well, we're going to sit down, and I had not followed a dog act before. That one was incredible, and I can't do backflips. I don't know if Don can, but he's running for governor, so he probably has to do a lot of things he hadn't expected. We're going to have a conversation here. Don has a number of things points he'd like to make, I'm sure, to all of you about his positions on environmental issues. But I thought it might be helpful just to get a better feel for Don's history, his personal background. I actually met him originally cross-country skiing in New Hampshire. He and his wife, his kids, and now his grandkids spend a lot of time up there skiing in the winter. So I thought maybe we'd start by, Don, maybe you could share a little bit about where you grew up, what brought you to Massachusetts, and a little bit about your family.
Thanks, Doug. Happy to do that, and thank you all. My name is Don Berwick, as you've heard. I'm running for governor, and there's a Democratic primary election September 9th. That's the election that's coming up. I grew up in a really small town in Connecticut, a tiny town. My father was a general practitioner, a doctor, made house calls. My mother was an activist there. And I grew up in a very rural area, and ever since then my family's been very interested in outdoors pursuits. I have 4 kids. My wife Ann is chair of the Public Utilities Commission of Massachusetts. She's a deeply committed environmentalist. For our whole marriage, being out of doors, hiking, and enjoying the wilderness, that's been part of our lives. I have 4 kids. Ben is my oldest. He's a lawyer in the Justice Department in Washington. And then my second is Dan. He works on solar energy. My third is Jessica. She's a doctor and lives in Africa, in Zimbabwe, where she and her husband work on human rights. And my youngest is Becca, who's a school teacher and just moved to Spain for 2 years, where she's going to be teaching and then come back here.
Now you have grandchildren as well, because I've seen them getting towed around in sleds behind cross-country skiers.
Absolutely, Evan and Caleb and Nathaniel, and Nathaniel just got his first pair of skis this winter.
Tell the folks here, because clearly there are a lot of people interested in environmental stuff. You have a really interesting house. You want to tell us about your house?
I do, yes. The house we have, it's a weekend home, has solar panels on it, and it's also there's a standard in Austria and Germany called Passive House, P-A-S-I-F house. This is a zero net energy house. This is a house so well insulated and so tight and so well managed with respect to energy use that you can run the entire house on the power of a hairdryer, 2,000 watts. The house has no furnace, doesn't need one. It's so tight. We have a little bit of propane heat, and that's about it, and a wood stove. We put solar panels on this year, and the house now generates electricity, feeds it back into the grid. I've got 5 months running of zero energy bills, zero electricity bills in the house.
Wow. Oh, wow. And when the house is that tight, you have to deal with air-to-air heat exchange. You have an air-to-air heat exchange.
Yes, the house doesn't breathe the way a normal house does. You have an active air exchange. It's a system. It's the most comfortable house I've ever been in. And it not only exchanges air actively, but as you said, it's a heat exchange. So the hot air leaving the house warms the incoming cold air, so it dramatically lowers any energy loss, and it's a delightful house to live in.
All right, now Don, his career prior to running for governor has been an amazing many years in healthcare and healthcare reform. We'll get to the environmental questions, but you became a doctor. Then you got into the whole question of how to reform the healthcare system, the management system. Then you ended up in the federal government. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, quickly. I'm a pediatrician, and I practiced for 20 years, but I'm also an executive. So right from the start, I was the vice president of the Harvard Community Health Plan, the organization I worked in. My job was to improve quality, and I learned how to do that by studying outside healthcare. So I was looking at NASA and Bell Laboratories and manufacturing companies, and I figured out how could you take modern approaches to management, so that quality improves all the time for customers and the workforce is really able to get the job done the way they want to. How could you bring that into healthcare? And that's what I did. And I started an organization, a nonprofit organization called IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. It started 25 years ago with a little grant. We grew it over 25 years. I led it for 19 years to a global organization. It works all over the world. It's worked in 70 countries, every state in the union, and our mission has been to improve health and well-being for everyone. And that was my job, executive. I'm more an executive. I'm a doctor, but my career has been more in management and leadership. It's wonderful. And then President Obama asked me to come to Washington, and that was a request that I come and run Medicare and Medicaid, which are the largest agency in federal government by budget. It's $800 billion. It's the lead agency for healthcare reform. So I went to Washington, ran that agency for a year and a half. The Republican Party blocked my confirmation, like they blocked Elizabeth Warren. So the president kept me there as long as he could under a recess appointment, but then the time ran out. I came back here. And I'd love to be the governor here. I think Massachusetts can be an example for the whole country with respect to a progressive agenda, successfully carried out, human rights, social justice, equality, and yes, is responsibility for environment and for each other. And I would love to be able to lead that here.
And you mentioned to me when we were talking on the phone the other day that you think there's an interesting nexus between healthcare reform, healthcare, medical issues, and the environment. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, there is. I mean, if you think about it, the purpose of a health care system should be health. And the system we built right now, it isn't really oriented that way. It's miraculous. It can do amazing things in hospitals and clinics, but we're never going to be healthy as a nation or as a community or as a commonwealth by pushing on healthcare as the mainstay for that. That's the repair shop. That's after things have gone wrong. And it's hideously expensive to do that. Healthcare, we're the most expensive state and the most expensive country in the world, and that's partly because we don't do it right. Healthcare is much too focused on inpatient care, which we need, and machines, but not on keeping us well. When you actually focus back on wellness, costs fall, your lifespan improves, your vitality is better, we live longer, it's a win, it's a win-win. But to do that, we have to reform healthcare. It's 42% of our state budget, by the way, so healthcare is taking a lot of opportunity from other things we need to do. Well, you think about it, what makes us healthy is not medicines, it's environment, it's a healthy place to be, it's nutrition, it's the exercise patterns we engage in, which means we have to have smart streets and smart communities where exercise is possible. Poverty affects it. When you're poor, it's very hard to stay healthy because you can't get access to the foods you need. My whole campaign team took the SNAP challenge last fall. We lived on food stamps for the amount of money you get for food stamps for a week. Man, it was something I couldn't approach a fresh vegetable or fruit in that time. Couldn't afford it. Everything we ate was high calorie and not so good for us. And then there's just injustice. Leaving people out of this economy doesn't work. We need to look at the generators of health and work on it. And as governor, I want to do that. What you're seeing here today is absolutely wonderful. GreenFest is inviting us to be introduced to what looks to me as a doctor as a whole bunch of health-generating ideas, activities, attitudes, resources. There's a very deep connection here.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, for instance, the activity level that a person pursues. It's a fascinating set of data now on the more people walk, the more they just are out and about. The more we design communities to be more walkable and receptive to pedestrians, the healthier they are. They don't weigh as much, they have a stronger hearts. Talk a little bit about how the state government might be able to help.
Yeah, well, Doug, I know I'm talking to one of the world's experts. Doug is holding his light under a bushel. He's one of the real teachers and leaders in this field and has been for decades, so I'll take your counsel on it, but let an amateur try. It has to do with smart growth in smart communities. Communities and environments that invite you to walk, to enjoy the outdoors, to eat well. This means streets that work for us. There's something called it's multi-use streets. It's complete streets where you can drive your car, but there's also public transit and you can walk or ride your bike. I think there's a Massachusetts town. It's been is it Littleton? Littleton has an experiment with smart streets with complete streets. There's smart growth, smart development, communities that are attractive, Go over and see what Mayor Curtatoni's done in Somerville with Assembly Square. It's a lovely place to be, but there's infrastructure there. You really can get along. And there's also housing you can afford, as well as Mystic River waterfront, thinking smart about development. I'll issue an invitation. Next Monday, August 18th, I'm going to have a visit here in Boston from Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Earl's become a friend. He's a congressman from Oregon. He's one of the world's experts on transportation-based development, mass transit, and really using our community properly to support the kind of health Doug and I are talking about. Earl and I are going to meet in Mattapan Square at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, bus platform 28. And we're going to take some of the transit opportunities around Massachusetts, ending up at South Station, exploring what would it be like to be a Commonwealth that becomes the envy of the world with respect to the way we use transport to help us move around, grow our economy, and be healthier. It's all one. Yeah. And I know you've thought that way for your whole career, Doug.
Well, and it's fascinating to see what happens in a place like Boston, the communities we have, the suburbs, as we start to knit that together more and take advantage of it. Let's talk a little bit about climate change. It's the big enchilada of environmental issues. Probably everyone here is quite aware of it. The state has a role, and it's a global problem, it's a global challenge. But why don't you tell folks a little bit about what you would do as governor on climate change to try to address this issue?
Well, climate change, of course, it's a global problem. We just passed 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. That's headed for very serious problems now. If Hurricane Sandy had hit Boston, the waves would have been lapping at the steps here of City Hall. We dodged the bullet. We won't keep doing that, though. So we have a serious problem. One thing we need is climate adaptation. We need to have our wetlands used properly and our computers out of the basement up to the top, up to the 5th floor. And I'm the only candidate for governor that wants a cabinet level post to help us with this very serious threat. But that's after the horse has left the barn. We got to go back to the causes, and that has to do with our use of energy. And there's stuff we can do. We are doing. We should be proud in some respects, but there's more we can do. The three basics of energy are conservation, clean energy, and appropriate use of fossil fuels. For conservation, I think it's the big opportunity. I think so much of the energy we use, we don't have to. If we got smarter about insulating our homes, like I have with ours, if we got smarter about smart grid, energy efficient appliances, I think electric vehicles count. We're headed now in an 8-state agreement to have about 25%, I think, of our vehicle fleet to be electric by 2020 or 2025. I think we should be the leader of all those states. So using less energy, that's number one. A lot of these exhibitors here have tremendous ideas about how to do that. Then there's clean energy, which is the growth of the ability to supply the energy we need without burning fossil fuels or nuclear. Clean energy here means solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, and that's a challenge to us. We have to be very mature about this. We have to realize that we're going to have to invest to get this. Solar power is great. It's clean. We are on a good roll here. When Governor Patrick came in, we had 4 megawatts of solar power. Now we have, I think, over 450, and we're aiming for 1,600 megawatts by 2020. If I'm governor, we'll at least get that, and I'd like to do more with solar. Hydro's tougher. We don't make hydroelectric power generally here, except in small distributed ways. The hydroelectric power is in Canada. So the next governor is going to have to really work with the northern New England states to get transmission down here so we can use that power. And I'm for that. The biggest for us is wind power. To give you the numbers, there's 5 gigawatts of wind power. That's a lot. Offshore here in Massachusetts, it's offshore wind. We need to develop that, and anyone like me who's a progressive in this race, we've got to favor developing wind power. And then there's the fossil fuel issue. We are dependent on fossil fuels. We're shutting down our coal and oil plants, thank goodness. Braden Point and Mount Tom and Salem Harbor, they need to go away. That's a very risky way to make energy, electricity. That leaves us with basically gas and nuclear, neither of which is great. And I think we need a trajectory to get as far off fossil fuels as fast as we can. There's a big controversy right now about fossil fuel supply with the Kinder Morgan pipeline coming through the western part of this state. I've taken a stand against that pipeline right now. I do not see the rationale yet established for a multi-billion-dollar investment in gas. But no matter what we do, we're going to have a bridge through fossil fuels that really works for people.
One of the interesting things about gas is also the question of leakage, methane leakage. I know you're familiar with it. And there's been a lot of talk around fracking and the release of methane from the gas fields, but we also are losing a lot of methane from the gas pipes that are
Right.
running to our cities, which is something the state can address directly.
Yeah, no, you know more about that than I do, Doug, but I know our gas pipelines, the existing ones, are quite leaky, and that's a conservation issue. Repairing that is a massive undertaking. We've got to get really serious about that. A lot of this is energized by the price of fossil fuels, and the other thing I'll mention is I'm the only candidate for governor now committed to an environmental fee, a carbon tax. Right now, when you put a gallon of gas in your car or add a gallon to your heating oil to your tank, what you're doing is handing a tremendous subsidy to the fossil fuel industry because they're getting that money, and then you're paying all the costs of the global warming, the threats to health, the environmental impact of the carbon that's being released in the fossil fuels. A more correct way to do that is to internalize the cost of carbon and the price of fossil fuels so you pay more at the pump. But that could be revenue neutral. We can have a refund or a rebate to the citizens of Massachusetts for that money, but at least then we're appropriately seeing the cost of fossil fuels, and that'll energize our economy with respect to clean energy. And the recent study that was done by Remy says that if we took that step in policy, we'd be adding jobs to Massachusetts, because Massachusetts doesn't make fossil fuels, those are imported. All of that reinvestment now in clean energy is internal in the state, grows jobs. We already have 80,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts. They grew 24% 2011-12. It could be a great growth industry here, but that's got to be the right policy to support that.
Right, live by our wits, because we're not going to mine the fuels here. Let's switch gears a bit. There's a referendum coming up in November on the bottle bill. Do you have a view on that and the solid waste more generally?
I favor the bottle bill. I think that it's another area of responsibility. If you've seen the pictures of our oceans and our wetlands, clogged by the stuff we throw away, we just got to be more sensitive to that. And I think it's a responsible piece of legislation, and I do support the bottle bill, as apparently the majority of people in the state do. I read the papers this morning.
Yeah.
The bigger issue of solid waste management is important. I think there are some opportunities here around appropriate management of organic debris in the waste system. That actually can be a power source if we get into biofuels. There are trade-offs of biofuels, but I think it's one other area where using what we have appropriately instead of filling landmass is a good way to go.
Right. Well, we also can mine the gas that's coming out of landfills, and there's all sorts of things. Just a much more sophisticated use of it, which is a high-tech approach, builds jobs.
When you mentioned landfill, I have to tell you one other thing. I just saw this 2 days ago in Lowell. This is going to be a little bit of a story, but give me 30 seconds. So Lowell is a city with a lot of problems. There are 25 gangs in Lowell. There are kids at risk, and so there's a wonderful program there called UTEP, United Teen Equality Center. And it's taking very high-risk kids and bringing them back in off the streets and giving them an opportunity to avoid going back to prison or getting into trouble. It's an amazing program, one of the best I've seen in the state. One of the things they're doing with these kids is teaching them how to work, how to be a responsible employee, how to make some money. And they become one of the 2 big sources in the state for recycling mattresses. All those mattresses in your basement. They can go to UTEP, and they take them apart, and they sell off the foam, they recycle the other components of mattresses and metals. They make money at that, and landfills don't get filled up by discarded mattresses. Isn't that neat? That's a combination, justice, helping kids, and environmental responsibility.
And building an economy.
Building an economy.
Yeah. Transportation. We've talked a bit about walking pedestrians. There's a lot going on in many of our communities, Boston leading among them. The bicycle infrastructure, I'm a complete addict to the loaner bikes, the Hubway. We see the same thing in cities around the country. Thoughts about transportation generally? The state, actually it's one of the largest agencies in the state after healthcare, spends billions of dollars every year just keeping the bridges in repair, the trains running on time. Talk a little bit about what you do with transportation.
MassDOT does their best. It's a good agency, but we are so far behind, I think due to irresponsible public leadership in past administrations. We fell $15 billion behind in maintaining our public transit, our roads and our rails and our bridges, and that's been kicked down the road a lot. Now, last year, the legislature began to close the gap. It amounts to about $1.2 billion a year. Just to get back to state of good repair, they added $600 million, I think, got halfway there. The governor went back this year, asked for more, got some more. But this is a matter just of responsibility. We've got to get back to a well-maintained system. And this has to do with service features. I was happy to see the T add some late night service recently, an experiment. But I've been out all over the state. This isn't just Boston, in places where the regional transit authorities can't keep up with the demands that people have. Their schedules don't match. I met a lady in Greenfield who was literally near tears. I mean, she was tearing because she has a job, finally got a job. Her job ends at 9 p.m. The RTA shuts down at 7 p.m. So this is a matter of our lives, our livelihoods, social justice, because the people who depend on mass transportation are the people generally people low income that depend on it. Beyond that, though, there's something very exciting here. I see Massachusetts as a leader. I mean, we have so much inventive capability here, so much support for our science and our research, and such an activated public. Why don't we lead the world? Why don't we start to think beyond repair into the next generation of real advances in transportation, modal shifts like you're talking about? What about our bikes? What about walking? What about mass transit? Changing our view of the level of technology of mass transit. What about more work on light rail and some very inventive, cutting-edge stuff? And I think we can lead. I think we should. And this is not just a Boston area issue. We got to be very careful. This state needs regional equity of transit, and that's crucial. But I know we can do it. Again, I'm excited about Congressman Luminar's visit on Monday because I already know a lot from him. But anyone who comes along on that, you're going to learn a ton about this cutting-edge, smart streets, real changes in technologies that will help us move the way we need to.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to take Don up on his invitation on Monday. Earl Blumenauer really is an extraordinarily talented and thoughtful guy. He's been a major advocate on transit and bikes and everything over his career. I want to shift gears one more time. And are you positioned one way or another on casinos? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I'm the only candidate for governor against casinos and for the repeal. Let me take a minute and explain. Casinos are now going to come into our state unless we change our direction due to a law in 2011 that's allowing 3 casinos to enter the state. This is a massive mistake. There are 39 states with casinos, and we know what happens. The research units that have studied it, there's a research group at the University of Buffalo, there's a research group at the University of Illinois. You can call them as I did and talk with them and ask what happens when casinos come in. They destroy things. Casinos are said to add jobs. Yes, there are jobs in the casinos and construction jobs associated, but when you net it all out, they kill more jobs than they add. We know that. The state of Illinois just did a study of that. There's 1 job lost for every slot machine at a casino. Casino has 5,000, 6,000 slot machines. Slot machine money leaves the state, it doesn't stay in the state. Gambling addiction doubles in the area around casinos. Gambling addiction is a very serious problem, and people with gambling addiction lose their job. They become dependent. They lose their dignity. They often lose their families. Casinos are said to add to state revenue. They add to the state revenue due to fees, and then the state loses more because it has to add to public safety. It has to help those victims of gambling addiction and their families. It has to provide unemployment benefits to the people that lose their jobs and the small businesses that are shuttered around casinos. If you doubt what I'm talking about, go visit Niagara Falls, New York, or Ledyard, Connecticut. Go see what's happening today in Atlantic City as casinos are closing. Visit Mississippi.
One that's 2.5 years old that's closing now.
It's a sick industry. If you read the article in the New York Times 2 days ago, it just showed the trajectory of casinos. Why would this Commonwealth invest in a declining industry that adds addiction and mental health problems, adds drunk driving, kills jobs, kills state revenue, and call it a success? This is an issue of inequity. What's going on, I'll tell you, is that big money, these multi-billion-dollar corporations, are coming in, selling us on a theory that's wrong, because it's very much in their interest, and we need the public to come back at this. I'm so proud of what happened in East Boston. The No East Casino group, the anti-casino group there, they won the referendum in East Boston against casinos, even though they were outspent. Get this, they were outspent by big money, 83-1, and they still won. Now we have a statewide referendum, a lot of grassroots momentum. That referendum is November 4th, and please join me in opposing casinos and voting for that repeal.
Don, I know you've got a full schedule, so I want to respect that and let you get on with the rest of your travels today. But running for governor is quite an enterprise. I must say that watching the amount of effort that it takes and the personal commitment and the family commitment that it takes, It really is extraordinary. It takes a good man to even want to run, let alone be governor. Can you tell me what prompted you to want to run for governor?
What prompted me to want to run for governor? Justice. I mean, I saw in Washington, working for President Obama, a country getting into deeper and deeper trouble with inequality, with concentrations of wealth. I don't begrudge wealthy people their wealth if they earned it honestly, but they've got to ante up and help people who don't have the wealth. Growing numbers of Americans scared about their futures, their jobs, a middle class that isn't even really middle class anymore. They're just scared. And so many people falling off our radar, falling off the social ability to participate, whether they're the very poor, kids who can't make it in school, returning prisoners, people who are incarcerated trying to come back into our communities, and just people who are frightened about the future. But I know we can fix it. I know we can fix it. We're compassionate enough, we're good enough to do it. I'm an executive, I've had the skills to work on change all over the world for 30 years. It's not a problem I can back away from. I'm from the 60s, you know, it's when my coming of age, and the phrase then was, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. We got problems, and I want to be part of the solution. And in terms of it's hard to run. It's not as hard as cross-country skiing as you do it. It's hard, but it's so rewarding because I think the progressive instinct, the idea that we help each other, that we're in this together, that injustice isn't good, inequality hurts everybody, that everybody needs a shot, a chance, that's widespread. Many, many more people in this state share in common with me those values than would ever call themselves progressives. So that values centering is what's giving me so much energy in this campaign.
Well, it's really good of you to take this on. Remind everyone here when the primary is.
Primary election, Democratic primary is September 9th. Please vote. Hope you vote for me, but even if you don't, please vote. A silent public is an invitation to real trouble. So September 9th, please show up, and I'd love your support. It's Don Berwick. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Don both for his comments and for his leadership and his candidacy.